Hi there, my name is Stef and I am a Senior Development Consultant with Sparks. We are a national agency in Scotland that supports student engagement and the quality of their learning and teaching experience. And today I'm going to cover a session around. So this session will explore the initial reactions to moving internal reviews online with regards to student engagement and some of the adaptations that institutions have made to continue to engage students in their reviews. The opportunities and challenges that this format has presented and where we go from here, what happens next, and how do we capture some of these changes and successes moving forward. So just to give you a bit of background, internal reviews under normal circumstances in Scotland, this is kind of what they look like in terms of student engagement. It's twofold really. First of all, there's a student panel member who is usually a full-time officer within the student association or perhaps a student rep such as a course rep or lead rep, and sometimes they may just be an ordinary student. But they are a full member of the panel and they should be supported to engage fully in the process as any other member of the panel would be. The other side of student engagement is the groups of students that the panel will meet with. There's no set protocol around about who these students need to be. Institutions generally tend to invite course reps from the programme that's being reviewed to speak about their experiences. As such, these students tend to be very much engaged as they're already an active rep, attending student staff meetings and working with department staff and fellow student representatives. Engagement varies across Scotland's institutions in terms of what that looks like in their internal reviews. But I think it would be fair to say that even when engagement is high, it does tend to be the same type of students who are engaging. So as such, panels may not be hearing from a real diverse range of voices or experiences of underrepresented groups. So when the pandemic hit, institutions had to really quickly make a choice. They had to either continue to conduct their planned internal reviews but move the process wholly online, or they had to postpone all of their up and coming internal reviews and wait and see how the situation developed. Many chose to postpone, but a few did push ahead and they adapted the review format quickly to continue with their review schedule. And so sort of initially, all of those who did continue with the reviews, these are the very quick adaptations they had to make, and all of them did make. Papers, which had previously been hard copies, were all adapted and had to be sent digitally to the panel members. All internal reviews were moved online and were hosted mostly via Zoom or Teams, and no face-to-face aspect remains. And students were still invited to come to the review, but in the online review meeting, in the same way as before, to provide feedback on their learning experience. What have some of them done differently? So what I've picked up here is from the conversations we've been having across the sector is what have some of the institutions done that they've never done before in response to the pandemic to ensure that students were still engaging in their internal reviews. And so we have an example here from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. They actually invited students and graduates to contribute to the review by providing feedback to questions posed by the panel electronically. So they sent out an electronic survey of these questions that had been put together by the panel before the panel took place, and this feedback was then considered by that review team and it fed into discussions on the day. Another example we have here is that students were brought together virtually before the review took place, and they were asked to discuss key successes and challenges of the programme that was being reviewed, and they responded collectively to a set of questions that had been posed by the quality team and via written feedback, and then that again was discussed by the panel on the review day. In this instance, actually, the review convener met with students online on a one-to-one basis at a time convenient to them to gather feedback, which was then fed into review discussions. And here, the Students' Union actually held one-to-one support sessions for the student panel member for the reviews that they had to go over the different papers and materials and provide additional support for this new format. There are just some examples that I've wanted to highlight, and I think what we really want to get into is what have been the opportunities and challenges that this review format has had. I think from the conversations we've had, the biggest opportunity has been the breadth of opinion. So institutions have recognised that they really have had groups of students engaging who typically would not have engaged before, or would struggle to engage in an in-person review for personal reasons or for other reasons. Part of that being because it's easier for them to engage in a time and space convenient to them, rather than having to rearrange workload around travelling and commuting, which, you know, there would be a much more time capacity there for an in-person review. It's also been noted by students that the online format is more accessible in some ways. There's more functions for them to engage in, so the opportunity to raise a hand when wishing to come in, rather than kind of having to try and catch the convener's eye, has been really popular. And to be able to agree with points via a thumbs up or a reaction as such. You know, I know that Zoom and Teams both have kind of reaction features that allow them to agree or disagree. It's another way for them to be engaging without maybe necessarily having to come on and speak, or to make comments in the chat box. Have also been really popular. So it's just there's more options and more accessible options for the students to be engaging. And one thing that was really picked up is that the online format is less daunting and formal. And I think that that's definitely the case in institutions where perhaps their internal reviews would normally be held in quite formal settings, so maybe such as courtrooms within the institution, or very kind of, you know, formal meeting rooms. Taking it online has really kind of taken away that very formal nature of it, and it's created a more equal playing field for the students to feel really part of the process. And student panel members have highlighted that they felt more confident in speaking up and being an active panel member, and I think that really does rely heavily on the fact that, you know, you're all on the screen together, and there's no hierarchy when you're on the screen. Everyone's an equal member when you're having these types of discussions. Everyone can be seen and heard at an equal level. And generally the observation was that it just felt like there was more space and more opportunities to contribute. Some of the challenges institutions have highlighted though, and I think really we need to think about these and how we address these. Digital fatigue is something that obviously we've spoke about over many different ways that we're engaging now in an online environment. You know, just even through their own learning and teaching, students are finding themselves obviously sitting at a screen more often than they ever have before. And that's something that needs to be addressed with internal reviews. They're already quite an intense process and quite a time-consuming process, even under normal circumstances. And so institutions have to be really conscious not to overburden attendees or to overload the schedule. And there was a requirement for more breaks and for the reviews to be spread over multiple days, and to ensure that people weren't sat at a screen for too long and that didn't create other additional issues. Another challenge that many face was around about the digital literacy and tech support. So there was a greater need to ensure that everyone had the capacity and the facilities to engage in an online format. So making sure that they had access to equipment and to appropriate Wi-Fi, and that there was tech support on hand to make sure if there was any issues that they could be rectified. So there was, you know, both a requirement for tech support before the review and on the day itself, and that obviously meant there was an additional sort of staff requirement there. Generally about additional support, so there was just more of a requirement for support and guidance for panel members, for staff and students who are involved and engaged in the review, to how they engage in this new online way and using this new format. And so a lot of institutions needed to put together guidance materials, guidance notes, to ensure that they were comfortable in engaging in this environment. And then lastly, the biggest challenge, and that was also highlighted, was around about the speed. They just had a very quick turnaround time. Pandemic hit in March, and a lot of institutions who did take the reviews and kept the reviews going had their first review only a few weeks later in April. So there was a very quick turnaround time to take everything online, and significant pressure on quality teams to adapt the formats and any resources or papers. And I think generally speaking that there are a lot of these underlying processes tend to be paper based, so there was a lot of modification that had to be made very quickly. I think what has definitely come out of the discussion and observations that we've had though is that none of these practices are necessarily innovative. They're not, you know, it's not that they've never been done before in any sort of way, shape or form. And they are small changes, but they are having a big impact. And I think that it's interesting to note that it has taken a global pandemic to bring about this significant change that has happened with student engagement, that has, you know, things that could have been done for years, you know, None of this practice is things that couldn't have been done under normal circumstances. And it does open up a wider consideration around about this emerging pattern that we're seeing. We've seen increases in engagement and attendance across a whole range of activity, not just internal reviews, since we've moved online. Training events, network meetings, student staff meetings, and sector committees. Across both our work at Sparks and institutional work across Scotland, there is a significant surge in students wanting to engage. We've seen that the shape of student engagement has changed, and that students are taking that opportunity to engage in things that have always existed, but they've maybe not previously engaged in before. And that does make you wonder why, why is this happening now? And these are just kind of some things that we started to explore. Is it just because, well, we're all online, so it's the only way, and therefore, and that's why we're seeing this increase? Is it that students have additional worries and fears that they want to discuss? So the fact that we're going through a pandemic has obviously created other additional challenges for some students, and therefore, they're looking for that time and that space to be able to talk about these. Students, are they keen to just share and learn from good practice? They want to protect their educational experience, so they want to take the opportunity, and whether that's speaking to staff, speaking to review panels, to make sure that good practice is learnt from and is shared across an institution. Is it that the online format is more accessible and so it's easier to engage? Is it just that students have more to say during a time of so much uncertainty? Because we don't know what's going to happen in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, a year's time, there is just more to think about, there's more to consider, and therefore they have more to say and want to engage in that opportunity. Could it be that some students are feeling isolated and lonely, and therefore want to take these opportunities to engage in activities, to speak to peers, to speak to staff, and they wouldn't normally have had to because they weren't in a position where they were isolated? Is it just something to do? I mean, I think these are things that we perhaps need to explore as we begin to understand why student engagement has seen a surge over the last 6-7 months. And these are just ideas. They're not backed by evidence at the moment. These are just conversations we've been having with students and with sector colleagues to try and understand maybe what could be some of the influencers and motivators as to why we are seeing an increase in student engagement across events and activities and practices. I think one of the biggest interesting observations that's come out of this discussion that we've been having around about student engagement and internal reviews in particular, but I think it is related to student engagement across online formats in general. We've always had the tech but just never thought to use it, or perhaps never needed to, or perhaps never just quite used it in the right way. So as I mentioned, nothing that was adapted or introduced to take the reviews online is necessarily innovative or a drastic measure. In fact, much of this practice could have easily been done pre-pandemic under normal review circumstances. So it is interesting to think that it did take such a drastic occurrence such as COVID-19 to bring about these small changes that have had such a meaningful impact on student engagement. And I think that really leads us into the conversation as to what we do next and where we go from here. Because if we've always had the means to do it, but we've just chosen not to, and now we can see what impact that it's having, obviously we don't want to lose that impact. We don't want to go back the way if we found out a way that we can ensure that students are having more opportunity, more space, more time to contribute and to engage. So where do we go from here? What is the next step? Obviously this year will be an interesting time for many institutions. Those who did continue with the reviews during the initial months of the pandemic have had a head start. We now have got every institution across Scotland will need to do their internal reviews online. Although some were keen to retain some sort of face-to-face element, even for those who have reviews later on this academic year, it's very unlikely that any face-to-face opportunities will exist. I think everything will be online, and as such institutions will have to think about over the next couple of months how they plan for that. There will also be the need to think about what have we learned from taking these reviews online and from the student engagement in the online format. As such, I think there's three key areas that institutions need to be looking at. They need to be evidence gathering, so they need to begin to really understand why student engagement has increased or diversified during the pandemic with these online formats. So those questions that I posed earlier, which one of those are founded? You know, which can you identify as actually being a contributing factor in why student engagement has increased? So there's a lot of evidence and research that needs to be done there as institutions continue with their internal reviews online as to why students are engaging with it more than they ever have before. Institutions really need to be capturing positive practice, so what has worked well and why, and curating that innovative practice to share across anything that we're doing online, because I think, you know, something that's done really positively in an internal review that has created a positive impact on student engagement can be easily transferred to other online events and activities to make sure that we're really taking a whole sector approach or a whole institutional approach to ensuring that students have the opportunity to engage in these new online ways. And nurturing successes, so embedding the positive changes into normal practice, thinking what does need to be mainstreamed, what do we need to just now consider, and this is how we do reviews. These are permanent adaptations that we will now incorporate into our practice. And so I think that will be a lot of discussion that needs to be ongoing over the coming year as to how institutions think about when or if we go back to normal and we have face-to-face opportunities for student engagement. What are some of the lessons learned from taking things online that we want to keep doing? It doesn't need to be one or the other, they're not mutually exclusive. We can actually still continue to have these online aspects if we know it has a positive impact for students and their ability to engage in these types of events and reviews. And that is all from me, and thank you very much. I look forward to joining you at EQUAS in November and answering any questions you may have about this piece of work. And in the meantime, you can of course get in touch with me. My email is on the screen, as is my Twitter handle, and I look forward to having conversations with you around about this area. Thank you very much.